have you ever noticed how the calmest, most patient men can suddenly snap, lash out, or disappear emotionally? It's not that they were angry all along, it's what happens when their patience is tested, stretched, and ignored. Today, we're going to uncover the subtle ways women, often unintentionally, can turn a man from calm and collected into frustrated and irritable. And more importantly, how to recognize it before it's too late. You see, patience is often mistaken for weakness. People think that just because a man can stay calm, take a step back, or let things slide, he has unlimited tolerance. But the truth is, patience is like a reservoir, deep, yes, but finite. Every slight, every irritation, every small frustration adds a drop, and over time, those drops accumulate, filling the reservoir until it overflows. The most patient man you know isn't some unshakable rock. He's human. He feels. And when that reservoir of patience fills, the calm, composed exterior can give way to frustration, annoyance, and even anger. Now, the interesting thing is that it's rarely one big act that pushes him over the edge. It's the little things. The tiny, repeated triggers that seem insignificant on their own, ignoring commitments, belittling words, subtle disrespects, unmet expectations. Each one chips away at patience like a slow drip of water on stone. And here's the kicker: men often internalize these frustrations for far longer than they should. They tell themselves, I can handle this, it's not a big deal. They rationalize, they excuse, they adapt. But deep down, each compromise, each dismissal, each small irritation adds weight to their inner tension. This is where many women, without even realizing it, contribute to the transformation of a calm, patient man into someone who's on edge. It's not about intention, it's about pattern. Because men are often socialized to maintain composure, to be strong, to be unshaken. They bottle up those feelings. They don't always verbalize the annoyance. They don't storm out in dramatic protest, and they don't always lash out immediately. That's what makes it so dangerous. The patience that seems endless is actually silently counting down. You have to understand the psychology behind it. Patience is a gift, but it's conditional. It's patient only so long as respect, acknowledgement, and fairness exist. When those are absent or continually undermined, patience is stretched thin. And when a man feels that his efforts, his care, or his presence is ignored, it begins to twist into something else. Irritation, resentment, anger. What once was calm and measured now becomes reactive. The very patience that was admired becomes the foundation for explosive frustration. And here's something most people don't realize. The breaking point doesn't look the same in every man. Some may express it outwardly, raising their voice, snapping or withdrawing emotionally. Others internalize it, carrying the weight silently, letting it affect their energy, their motivation, and even their relationships. The transformation from patient to angry isn't always dramatic. Often, it's a slow erosion, a quiet, almost invisible shift that eventually manifests in behaviors that surprise those around him. But it doesn't have to reach that point. Recognizing the signs early, understanding that patience is not infinite, and respecting the boundaries of emotional endurance can prevent the overflow. It's about balance, awareness, and empathy. It's about understanding that a man who seems unshakable is actually watching, absorbing, and calculating whether his patience is respected or exploited. So the next time you see a man who's always calm, always measured, remember, he is patient, yes, but patient men are not limitless. Patience is a gift, and when it's pushed too far, it transforms into something that nobody wants to face. That's the silent truth most overlook, and it's where the quietest storm begins. One of the most powerful ways a patient man can start to lose his calm is through miscommunication. It's amazing how easily intentions can be misunderstood, how small words or gestures can be misread, and how what one person thinks is harmless, the other experiences as criticism, judgment, or even a personal attack. Men, especially patient men, often try to rationalize and make sense of interactions. They want to believe that everything is fine, that there's no underlying tension. But when communication repeatedly misses the mark, frustration begins to build quietly inside them. Think about it. How many times does a man hear what he interprets as criticism when it was meant as a suggestion? Or how often does he sense disappointment in a tone that wasn't meant to convey judgment? These misunderstandings accumulate, and each one adds a tiny layer of irritation. On its own, it may seem negligible, but patience isn't tested in giant leaps, it's tested in small, repeated increments. Over time, these miscommunications pile up, and the patient man, who once shrugged things off, begins to feel cornered, misunderstood, or undervalued. This isn't about blaming women for everything that goes wrong, it's about patterns. When someone constantly assumes the worst, questions every action, or interprets neutral behavior as a negative, it begins to feel like a pressure cooker. Men absorb that pressure, they internalize it, and slowly, quietly, it wears them down. And because patience often masks discomfort, the real weight of that buildup isn't visible until it becomes impossible to ignore. What's fascinating is how sensitive men can be to subtle cues, even ones that are unintentional. A sigh, a roll of the eyes, a tone that's sharper than intended. All of these things communicate something beneath the surface. And patient men, the ones who try to understand, to forgive, to rationalize, will still feel the impact. Every misinterpreted word is like a pebble dropped into their reservoir of patience. Individually, a pebble is harmless. But when pebbles keep falling day after day, the calm surface becomes rippled, and eventually, the reservoir is full. The danger is compounded when men feel they cannot express their frustration without escalating the conflict. Because they've been patient, because they've tried to understand, they often hold their tongue, waiting for the right moment to speak up. That restraint is honorable, but it also allows the miscommunication to fester. A single misinterpreted interaction can suddenly trigger an exaggerated response. Not because the man is inherently volatile, but because he's been carrying the weight silently for too long. And here's a truth that's easy to overlook: patient men don't want drama. They don't crave arguments. What they do want is to be understood, to feel respected, to have their intentions acknowledged. When repeated miscommunications make them feel the opposite, that's when anger sneaks in. It isn't sudden, it's cumulative. It's not irrational, it's built on layers of unnoticed slights, missed understanding, and unspoken frustration. So the key lesson here is this: patience doesn't mean invulnerability. A patient man's tolerance for miscommunication is not infinite. Words, tones, and gestures matter. How intentions are expressed and interpreted matters. And when patterns of misunderstanding persist, it slowly erodes the calmest of men, until what once was patience becomes irritation, and what once was understanding becomes resentment. One of the most underestimated ways a patient man begins to lose his calm is when his emotional needs are ignored. Patience is not a shield against feeling undervalued, unappreciated, or unseen. Even the most composed man carries a need for recognition, respect, and emotional connection. When those needs are consistently overlooked, it doesn't matter how calm he is by nature. Eventually, frustration begins to build. And it's not always about grand gestures or dramatic conflicts. It's often about the small, repeated moments that say, "I'm not being heard. I'm not being acknowledged." Think about it. A man who goes out of his way to help, to contribute, to communicate, only to have his efforts minimized, dismissed, or ignored, experiences a subtle, almost invisible erosion of patience. The human mind is wired to seek acknowledgement. When that acknowledgement is absent, the sense of invisibility grows. Every ignored message, every unappreciated gesture, every moment where his emotional labor is dismissed adds another layer of tension. The patient man tries to rationalize it, to let it slide, to avoid unnecessary conflict. But inside, the resentment quietly accumulates. And this isn't about entitlement, it's about balance. It's about recognizing that emotional reciprocity is a cornerstone of healthy interaction. When a man's attempts to connect are repeatedly met with indifference or neglect, he begins to feel that his patience is being exploited. There's a slow, creeping realization that effort without recognition is a one-sided investment. This awareness, when left unchecked, begins to transform calm patience into simmering irritation. What once was understanding becomes a quiet calculation of how much more he is willing to give before it's too much. What makes this so powerful is that patient men are often silent carriers of this frustration. They don't always express their hurt or dissatisfaction immediately. They may mask it with humor, distraction, or continued effort. But make no mistake, their patience is being tested at a level that few see. The longer emotional needs are ignored, the more the tension builds beneath the surface. The calm exterior becomes a fragile veneer, protecting a growing sense of disappointment and mounting resentment. It's in these moments, when emotional needs are overlooked repeatedly, that patience transforms into irritation. A man who once approached situations with understanding and composure now begins to respond with subtle frustration, impatience, or even withdrawal. He's not being unreasonable, he's responding to a lack of acknowledgement that has persisted far longer than anyone realizes. And it's important to understand that this is cumulative. One ignored moment isn't enough to break him, but repeated, consistent dismissal chips away at patience until it finally cracks. The quiet build-up of unacknowledged feelings is deceptive. To an outsider, it may seem as though he's still calm, still patient, still the same man he's always been. But internally, he's running low on tolerance. Each ignored feeling, each unmet need, each unrecognized effort slowly erodes his emotional reservoir. And when that reservoir reaches its limit, even the most patient man can reach a tipping point where frustration surfaces in ways that surprise both him and those around him. So the lesson here is clear: patience is not invincibility. Emotional needs matter. Recognition, respect, and acknowledgement are not optional, they are essential. Ignoring them doesn't just create temporary frustration, it sets the stage for long-term tension, a transformation from calm to irritation, from patience to anger. Understanding this and responding with empathy and awareness can prevent the quiet erosion that turns patience into resentment. Another subtle but powerful factor that transforms a patient man into someone who is easily frustrated is the dynamic of control. Most men, especially those who are calm and composed, are not naturally inclined toward conflict, but they do have a sense of autonomy, a need to feel respected in their choices and decisions. When that sense of control is repeatedly challenged or undermined, even in small ways, it creates a tension that can quietly gnaw at patience. It's not about domination in the obvious sense. It's often subtle, almost invisible, yet profoundly effective. Think about everyday interactions. Decisions about time, money, priorities, or even social situations can become arenas of control without either party fully realizing it. When a man feels consistently overruled, micromanaged, or dismissed in areas where he expects mutual respect, it chips away at his sense of agency. Over time, this repeated undermining, whether intentional or not, triggers a deep psychological reaction. It's not just annoyance, it's a sense of invisibility, a feeling that his perspective, judgment, and effort are undervalued. And for a patient man, this is especially damaging because he's been holding himself back, trying to stay composed, trying to maintain harmony while his frustration quietly grows. The interesting part is how subtle this can be. It may not even be overt power struggles. It could be small things: a tone of voice that dismisses an opinion, repeated interruptions, decisions made without consultation, or a constant sense that he must defend his choices. Each instance may seem minor, but they accumulate. Patience has limits, and when a man consistently feels his autonomy eroded, that limit is approached faster than anyone realizes. The very patience that once allowed him to navigate challenges with calm and understanding becomes strained under this persistent pressure. What's often overlooked is that the patient man doesn't immediately lash out. He may accommodate, compromise, or rationalize, believing it's easier to maintain peace than to fight every small battle. He may try to adapt, thinking, maybe it's not worth reacting. But here's the danger: the more he compromises, the more internal tension builds. Each suppressed reaction adds weight to the reservoir of patience, bringing him incrementally closer to a breaking point. Over time, the struggle for control, the feeling of being overridden or disregarded, becomes a silent source of anger that is only waiting for a trigger to release it. This is where awareness matters. Recognizing the subtle ways in which control dynamics affect a patient man is crucial. It's not about avoiding all disagreements or always deferring to him. It's about respecting boundaries, acknowledging contributions, and valuing autonomy. Even small gestures of respect, like consulting him on decisions, listening without judgment, and validating his perspective, can prevent the slow accumulation of tension that transforms patience into frustration. When these boundaries are ignored repeatedly, it is inevitable that a shift occurs. A patient man begins to feel trapped, constrained, or disrespected. His responses may become sharper, his patience thinner, his emotional presence more distant. The calmness that once defined him erodes under the pressure of repeated challenges to his autonomy, and anger begins to seep in. And the irony is that this anger is not born from inherent volatility. It is born from the very patience and tolerance that people admired in him to begin with. So it's critical to understand that patience does not exist in a vacuum. Respect for our autonomy, acknowledgement of effort, and careful navigation of power dynamics are not optional. They are essential. Ignore them, and even the most composed man can find himself frustrated, reactive, and emotionally withdrawn. One of the most overlooked reasons a patient man can turn angry is the constant tug of war between expectations and reality. It's easy to assume that patience means acceptance of everything as it comes, but the truth is far more nuanced. Patient men, like anyone else, carry expectations, sometimes unspoken, sometimes quietly understood. These expectations aren't demands for perfection, they are reasonable hopes for respect, acknowledgement, and a sense that their efforts matter. When reality consistently falls short, frustration quietly builds, like tension stretching a rubber band tighter and tighter. Expectations are everywhere, often subtle and invisible. They can be about mutual respect, communication, emotional reciprocity, or even the small things that signal appreciation. When those expectations are repeatedly unmet, it isn't always about deliberate wrongdoing. Often, it's about misunderstanding, forgetfulness, or differences in perspective. But to a patient man, the repeated gaps between expectation and reality can feel like a persistent undervaluing of his efforts. And here's the danger: patience can only stretch so far before it snaps. It's important to recognize that this frustration doesn't appear overnight. It's cumulative, built over days, weeks, months, even years. Every small unmet expectation adds a layer of tension. He may think, "I can handle this. It's not a big deal." But the human mind doesn't forget these moments. They stack quietly in the background, shaping his perception and emotional response. What was once patience begins to feel like endurance, and endurance, no matter how strong, has limits. The emotional effect is subtle at first. He may become quieter, less expressive, or more withdrawn. He might hold back comments, avoid confrontations, or smile while inwardly questioning why his efforts aren't recognized. His patience becomes a shield, but underneath, irritation grows. The small disappointments, the unmet expectations, the repeated disconnects, they all serve as sparks, quietly feeding a fire that has been smoldering under the surface for far too long. What's particularly challenging is that many women don't see this progression. They may assume that because he hasn't expressed anger, everything is fine. But patience isn't the absence of emotion, it's the control of emotion. And when expectations continue to be unmet, control becomes harder to maintain. The patient man begins to feel the strain between what he hopes for and what he experiences. He wants to be understanding, to adapt, to accommodate. But when he continually meets reality that falls short of his expectations, the friction between hope and reality transforms calm into irritation, tolerance into resentment. And it's not just about big expectations. Often, the smallest, repeated gaps create the greatest impact. The effort he puts into listening, supporting, and participating, if met with indifference, sarcasm, or disregard, erodes the reservoir of patience. The frustration is compounded because he genuinely wants things to work. He wants harmony, understanding, and connection. But the repeated mismatch between expectation and reality begins to feel like an endless uphill battle, and even the most patient man eventually feels the pressure mounting. The lesson here is that patience thrives when expectations are met with acknowledgement, when effort is recognized, and when intention is respected. Ignoring this delicate balance doesn't just create temporary frustration, it slowly transforms the calmest, most patient man into someone who feels unheard, unseen, and ultimately angry. The final and perhaps most dangerous factor in transforming a patient man into an angry man is the silent build up of tension. This is the stage where everything that has been happening, the small misunderstandings, the ignored emotional needs, the subtle challenges to autonomy, the unmet expectations, all converges quietly, almost invisibly. The patient man may appear calm, collected, even unfazed. To the outside world, nothing seems amiss. But beneath the surface, a storm is brewing, fueled by months or even years of unacknowledged frustration. What makes this so powerful is that the build-up is silent. There's no immediate confrontation, no sudden outburst. Instead, the anger forms slowly, often in a way that even the man himself doesn't fully recognize at first. He may feel restless, irritable, or emotionally distant without understanding why. He may notice a sharper tone creeping into his voice, a shorter fuse with minor inconveniences, or a subtle withdrawal from connection. These are warning signs, small cracks in the calm exterior that signal the reservoir of patience is nearing its limit. The silent build-up is dangerous precisely because it is invisible to most people. Patience masks frustration, giving the impression that everything is fine. He may continue to accommodate, continue to compromise, continue to push down the irritation because he wants harmony. But each suppressed feeling, each ignored signal, each unexpressed concern adds to the pressure inside, and unlike sudden triggers that provoke immediate reaction, the silent build-up is cumulative. It strengthens over time, making eventual release far more intense than it might have been if addressed early. The irony here is that this patience, this ability to endure and adapt, is exactly what allows the anger to grow so quietly. People admire it, rely on it, take it for granted, without realizing that the very patience they trust is not limitless. Every patient man carries boundaries, and every boundary has a breaking point. The silent build-up stretches those boundaries, testing endurance in ways that are subtle but relentless. And when those boundaries are finally crossed, the response can be disproportionate, explosive, or emotionally intense, because it is not just about a single incident, it is the culmination of everything that has been accumulating unnoticed. Recognizing the silent build-up requires careful observation, empathy, and awareness. It is about noticing the small signs, a hint of frustration in tone, subtle withdrawal from communication, or less engagement in activities that once brought joy. It is about understanding that a man who appears calm may be silently processing a vast amount of emotional weight. Respecting that, addressing concerns early, and validating efforts before the pressure becomes overwhelming can prevent this quiet transformation from patience into anger. And it's crucial to understand that the silent buildup is not about weakness or instability. It is about the natural limits of human endurance. Every man has a capacity for patience, and every patient man has moments where he needs acknowledgement, understanding, and support. Ignoring these needs doesn't just create temporary irritation, it sets the stage for long-term emotional strain, resentment, and eventually an angry response that surprises everyone involved. So the lesson is clear: the quietest storm is often the most dangerous. Patience, when unappreciated and stretched too far, eventually finds its limit. Understanding the subtle accumulation of frustration, recognizing the silent signals, and addressing them before it's too late is essential. Because when the calmest man reaches his tipping point, it's not a sudden eruption, it's the final, inevitable release of all the patience that has been quietly eroding over time.